Today, the world knows me as Lord Voldemort. But before that, I was just a boy named Tom, a child born into darkness, abandoned at birth, and raised in the cold halls of an orphanage. This is the story of how I became the most powerful dark wizard of all time. As you listen, you may find yourself understanding me, perhaps even empathizing with my journey. But make no mistake, this is not a story of redemption. This is the birth of darkness itself. Welcome to Wool's Orphanage, where the boy who would become Lord Voldemort first learned to embrace the darkness within. I was born on a cold, unforgiving New Year's Eve in 1926. My mother, Merope Gaunt, stumbled into the orphanage, her body weak and her spirit broken. As she cradled me in her arms, her eyes, filled with a mixture of love and despair, met mine for the first and last time. With her final breath, she gave me my name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, and whispered, "I hope he looks like his papa." Just like that, she was gone. I took my first breaths in isolation, surrounded by the stark walls of Wool's Orphanage. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and despair. There was no warmth, no loving embrace to welcome me into this world. Instead, I was greeted by the harsh cries of other abandoned children and the clinical efficiency of the orphanage staff. It was as if the universe itself recognized that I was already alone, already different. The matron of Wool's Orphanage, Mrs. Cole, was the first to lay eyes on me. I remember her face clearly, pinched with worry and a hint of fear as she looked into my dark eyes. "There's something not right about this one," she muttered to her assistant. My earliest memories of Wool's Orphanage are tinged with a sense of otherness. While the other children played and laughed, I found myself drawn to solitude, observing them from afar. There was Amy Benson, a timid girl with mousy brown hair who flinched at loud noises. Dennis Bishop, a boisterous boy with a penchant for bullying smaller children. And then there was Billy Stubbs, a freckle-faced boy who owned a white rabbit, his most prized possession. I watched them, studied them, and knew deep in my core that I was fundamentally different from them all. Not only different, I was better. As I grew older, strange occurrences began to happen around me. Objects would move without being touched, animals would flee at my approach, and sometimes when I was angry, the other children would suffer the consequences. I remember clearly the day Billy Stubbs tried to take a book I was reading. He had dared to challenge me, to question my authority. I could not accept that. As anger surged through me, I felt something else, a force, raw and potent. Suddenly, Billy was thrown across the room, crashing into a wall. The other children screamed, but I smiled. Mrs. Cole rushed in, her face pale with shock. As she helped Billy up, her eyes met mine, and I saw real fear there for the first time. In that moment, I knew. This was just the beginning. It was around this time that I began to form a closer bond with Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop. They were drawn to me, moths to a flame, sensing perhaps the power that lay dormant within me. I allowed their companionship, seeing it as an opportunity to further explore the extent of my abilities and influence over others. My next significant encounter was with a grass snake. It had slithered into the orphanage garden, causing panic among the children. But as I approached it, I felt no fear. Instead, I heard its hissing as clear as speech. "Stay back, human," it warned. As it reared up, ready to strike, I felt words forming in my mouth, not English, but something older, more primal. I hissed, and to my delight, the snake responded. It lowered itself, docile and obedient. This was power, I realized. This was control. The incident with Billy Stubbs' rabbit was when the others truly began to fear me. Billy had been boasting about his pet, and I felt a burning desire to take away something he loved. He needed to be taught a lesson. That night, I snuck into the rabbit's hutch. I didn't touch it physically, but I felt my power wrap around the creature. The next morning, Billy's agonized scream echoed through the orphanage as he found his beloved pet hanging lifeless from the rafters. Mrs. Cole questioned me, her voice trembling slightly. "Tom," she said, "do you know anything about this?" I met her gaze, my eyes cold and unblinking. "No, Mrs. Cole," I replied smoothly. "How could I?" She knew that this was only the beginning of what I was capable of. The summer outing to the seaside was an annual tradition at Wool's Orphanage, a day when the children could escape the confines of London's grey streets. For me, it was a perfect opportunity. As we approached the craggy cliffs overlooking the turbulent sea, I felt a strange pull towards a dark, foreboding cave nestled in the rocks below. Mrs. Cole, distracted by the other children, didn't notice as I slipped away, beckoning Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop to come with me. They followed me obediently as I led them away from the group, towards a hidden cave I had spotted earlier. This would be the day I would truly test the limits of my power. The cave was dark and foreboding, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks echoing ominously. I could feel Amy and Dennis's fear growing with each step we took deeper into the cavern. "Tom," Amy whimpered, "I don't like this. We should go back." Their fear was intoxicating, fueling my own sense of power. I led them to a small chamber where the darkness seemed to press in on us from all sides. I turned to my companions, their faces pale in the dim light. "Are you afraid?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, trembling. I smiled. "Good. You should be." With a mere thought, I extinguished the lantern we had brought, plunging us into total darkness. "We're going to play a game," I said, my voice echoing off the damp walls. "It's called Obey or Suffer." I saw the terror in their eyes, and it thrilled me. What happened next was a symphony of fear and power. I commanded the darkness itself, making it writhe and twist around Amy and Dennis. They screamed as shadowy tendrils caressed their skin, as unseen hands pulled at their clothes and hair. I whispered in Parseltongue, and the cave came alive with a sound of slithering. Phantom snakes appeared from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unearthly light. Amy and Dennis huddled together, sobbing and begging for mercy, but I was far from done. I reached into their minds, pulling out their deepest fears and giving them form. Dennis saw his dead parents, rotting and accusing. Amy was surrounded by a sea of blood, rising slowly to drown her. All the while, I stood in the center of the chaos, drinking in their terror, feeling my power grow with every scream, every whimper. I knew then that this was my true self. This was my destiny, to command fear, to rule through power. When we finally emerged from the cave, Amy and Dennis were changed forever. They were pale, shaking, unable to speak of what had transpired. The light had gone out of their eyes, replaced by a haunted look that would never truly fade. I led them back to the orphanage, maintaining a facade of innocence as Mrs. Cole fretted over their disheveled appearance and vacant stares. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my room, Mrs. Cole confronted me. "What happened in that cave, Tom?" she demanded, her voice quavering. I met her gaze, allowing a hint of the darkness within me to show through. "Nothing they didn't deserve," I replied coldly. In that moment, I saw real fear in Mrs. Cole's eyes. She finally understood the true nature of the child in her care. I had tasted true power, and I knew there was no going back. As our conversation drew to a close, I I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a nearby window. The boy staring back at me was no longer just Tom Riddle, orphan and outcast. He was something more, something greater. It was at that moment that I first truly felt the stirrings of Lord Voldemort within me. But my journey was far from over. I sensed a change in the air. Something was coming, something that would alter the course of my life forever. Little did I know that the next day would bring Albus Dumbledore to the orphanage, opening the door to a world of magic, power, and destiny. But that, dear viewers, is a story for another time. If you've enjoyed this glimpse into the origins of Lord Voldemort, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter in the rise of the Dark Lord. After all, Hogwarts awaits, and with it, the true beginning of my rise to power.